How do you do, fellow Americans? A friend of mine recently said that my videos are too long and too boring. This is him, by the way, so please send him harassment. So this video is going to be a little bit shorter. I'm going to be working on a much longer video essay in the background. But in the meantime, yeah, enjoy this much lighter, shorter video on the Great Replacement Theory. Have you ever heard of a man named Aristotle? No, not many people have. But a few thousand years ago, he said that anything good will rest equidistant between two extremes. Within this golden mean, you'll find all the best answers to your problems. Between cowardice and foolhardiness, courage. Between sloth and greed, ambition. With over 1 million people coming to America every year, our immigration policy is not what you would call the golden mean. It's operated with no regard to the consequences of high immigration for decades because lobbyists are getting rich, Democrats are getting votes, and liberals are feeling good, while the working class are receiving all the downsides. The brunt of the problem is handed to them, and when they complain, they're shamed and they're smeared. Every major institution that stands to benefit from mass immigration in America works to keep the numbers high, and the masses all accepting it. Like
good little boys that we won't werewolf and go wild. You finished? I mean, there's so much self-pity.
What's the point of this? What is this guy talking about? I mean, what is this, 2016? We've had it over, all right? Immigration, who cares? That last BYU video, I liked that. That spoke to me, that made sense. But this guy's falling off, dude. It's over. He's falling off. I've got to re-up my Daily Wire subscription. How's Matt Walsh doing? What's a woman, am I right? That's pertinent, that's important. Whoa, Candace Owens? Daily Wire? Holy moly. I'm joining now.
Hey, I see you clicking off. Look. I know immigration is not the hot topic it once was. I know it's all about child drag shows now, but I want you to stay with me on this, my 100% male audience, because this really does have huge implications. You can go watch your Ben Shapiro Reacts to Woke TikToks Volume 54 later. Like it or not, immigration stays relevant because how we control it decides what happens to this country. There's a reason the left and the right fight so fiercely over it, because it basically decides the fate of both sides. And the reason I, of all people, want to weigh in on this, the immigrant, is because I've noticed Americans specifically have a hard time understanding what mass immigration does to a country. A lot of you believe normal immigration patterns and consequences don't apply to you because America is so unique. Because America is built on principles and ideas and not an ethnicity or a monoculture, so therefore integration is so much easier than other places. You can just rock up, become a citizen, say the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever, and voila, you are now an American, despite the fact that nothing about you was created in America. Even a lot of my Republican friends seem to think this way. They basically believe all the immigrants that come through osmosis become red-blooded Americans ready to fight for the Constitution and fight against China. And so the equation is more immigrants means more America. This is all flawed thinking, and people believe this despite the evidence that the same problems of immigration that's happening in the rest of the Western world, like balkanization, crime, housing crises, lowering wages, a decrease in national identity, all of these are happening in America.
Soy el fuego que arde tu piel, soy el agua que mata tu sed.
Let's get this one out of the way first, because it really is less important than the social implications of immigration. I think very few people are primarily motivated by the economics of it. I think the majority on the left support it because they think it's humanitarian. They think it's altruistic to help the people showing up at the border. And then on the right, well, they're focused on what it does to social cohesion. So I would suspect if it was a huge net loss, the left would still support it. And if it was a dazzling gain to the economy, the Trumpian right would still be against it. A significant portion of migrants to America remain low-skilled workers from the southern border. This is economically beneficial to the middle class and higher. Likely, you and me. Our wages will go up because of all the cheap labor. And this is what they talk about when they say all the wealth immigrants give us. But this is all at the cost of working class people. You see, this is the dirty secret. All immigration does is further the wealth divide. Very basic economics will tell you that a surge in low-skilled workers always hits hardest the wages of other low-skilled workers. That's because the larger a pool of a type of worker, the less valuable they become because they're more replaceable. When there's an abundance of workers, all the power is in the hands of the employer. They can pay you how they want, they can treat you like trash because they know that if you quit, you can be replaced in a second by hundreds of other Mexicans. I mean, other workers. But reduce this artificially large pool of employees and all of a sudden the power transfers back to the worker. We've all done retail, like everyone knows how much better the employer treats you when they need you versus when you need them. This principle of supply and demand applies to any demographic. If perchance millions of doctors rocked up on Ellis Island, then the value of doctors across the country would plummet. However, the majority of immigration is not doctors or lawyers. Take into account illegal immigration, it's low-skilled workers, so it's the bottom that's being hit the hardest. If we're being specific and not using buzzwords like the workers, it's the wages of high school dropouts that are decreasing. Generally, people across the political spectrum agree that is the case. And that population may not seem a lot to us. But look at it this way. Every year, over 1 million students drop out of high school, and every year, their prospects of having a good living decreases with this current rate of immigration. We're all consenting to it because we're profiting from cheap labor. The reason all these big companies pay billions of dollars to lobby for the free movement of people is, in short, to make more money and pay workers less, you know? And once this process of flooding the job market happens, there's really only so much you can do to help the working class maintain a good standard of living. The Bernies among you may suggest combating this by raising the minimum wage, but I'm sorry, you can't have a huge number of low-skilled workers, which is growing all the time, and high wages. One of them has to give out. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Raising wages will obviously just reduce the amount of people being hired. You'll have even more swaths of unemployed people. The inevitable conclusion we find here is we can alleviate the pressure on the working class by stopping this flood of labor, but that does come at a small cost to the rest of us. Likely, across the board, prices would go up. And I think there's things you could do to counteract the price hikes a little bit. You could cut corporate tax, but inevitably, it will cost us all a little bit more. Maybe that'll make our capitalist friends chafe a little. But if that means not leaving the working class in the dirt while we all profit, then I don't think that's an unreasonable sacrifice. And let's just give that a quick pause right there. It was at this point I began to go into an autistic frenzy, and I was just like popping the mic without realizing it. So I'm going to re-record my lines, minus the green screen, because I'm done with that joke. It's not unreasonable to make a sacrifice to improve the living conditions of the working class, especially when you take into account the depression, drug use, and suicide rate that plagues those communities. I'm going to try and be direct and simple here. For a while, conservatives in America have prioritized a freer market with less regulations in order to boost economic growth. And that's not inherently a bad thing. If anything, that's what's brought so many entrepreneurs and billion-dollar companies here. The problem is when these policies begin directly damaging millions of Americans for the sake of a few extra $1 billion. The problem is when a country starts to serve a company instead of the other way around. When American citizens who have been here for generations are being strong-armed into lower and lower wages because a company's paying the government to open the borders and replace them, there comes a time where you have to correct this. Not destroy the company, not drive them out like retard monkeys, just politely remind them that they don't run this country, and they should hire American. There are literally millions of disgruntled and poor Americans suffering right now. And this should matter to you because resentment is building. Populist revolts like the election of Trump or the Brexit vote are people crying out for their issues to be addressed. But it seems like our compromised politicians care more about the GDP and the company's well-being. Oh no, they want to cover up this inconvenient problem of disenfranchised Americans by bringing in millions of immigrants to replace them. Literally, as Chuck Schumer has said. So don't at me, ADL. Our politicians' client is not Walmart, it's not Amazon, it's not even the Koch brothers. It's the American people. And so before we even think about that family in Guatemala and improving their lives, we should be thinking about how we can bring the millions of American families hooked on benefits like a drug back into the workforce and improving their lives. This time offered with more incentives because they're actually wanted and needed by their employers. But if you remember, I began this video talking about the golden mean, and I did that for a reason, because I do think there's a balance here. I don't think a sudden immigration moratorium is really feasible or even beneficial. Mass immigration is really only one side of the coin here. The real battle is getting natives back into society. So any decrease in immigration should come with an equal increase in natives re-entering the workplace. But this won't even begin to happen until the constant stream of cheap labor is peacefully reduced, because the bottom line is this. While they can still outsource work to migrants, companies and the government will never be incentivized to motivate disenfranchised Americans. Mass immigration destroys the unity, trust, and often patriotism of a society that is unfortunately observable all across the world. When someone comes to a country alone, or as a single family, they have no choice but to go out and integrate into the larger country. In order to work and be trusted amongst the wider culture, they have to adopt most of their customs. And so by the time their children are born as birthright citizens, they can be almost indistinguishable from any other American. That is success through integration. But let's say people come in the thousands, or even millions. Well, then the incentives for integration completely dies off. Rather than have all that bothersome pressure to adapt to the wider culture, you can just move in next to someone from your home country and create your own self-serving insular community. Rather than go out and create business and trade with Americans and adopt their way of living, you can just maintain your own style of living, perpetuated with each other. And thus we see in real time racial enclaves starting to form, and each new wave of immigrants adds to the community and reinforces their foreign culture. And so they can slowly build and terraform this area into their country of origin, thus effectively continuing to live in Mexico or China whilst enjoying the privileges of the American economy. And this comes to the center of Americans' misunderstanding here. Too many Americans believe immigrants come here because they love America. Because they love the American culture and the way of life and the history and the Constitution. And most importantly, that they love American people. But this Apu caricature is not true for the majority of immigrants. Whoa, time out, dude. You're scaring the chicks off with your racism. Come on, bro, lay off the immigrants. You're making the TPUSA girls uncomfortable. Jokes aside, I want to clarify a few things so there's no room for misinterpretation. Firstly, there's loads of migrants from all over the world who genuinely want to start afresh in America as loyal and patriotic citizens. There are plenty of migrants who will kiss the soil upon arrival and will make it their mission to integrate as much as possible and adopt traditional American values and customs. But on the other hand, there are millions of people coming, so it's completely naive to think they all share that mentality. Many of them surprisingly actually still prefer their home country in almost every way. They just recognize the economic situation in America is superior. So there's a huge number of migrants not willing to give themselves over to America in language, custom, and deed, but rather expect America to change and accommodate them. I know this because this is what they tell me. I blend in as a Brazilian. Second item of business. I've probably joked about Mexico too many times in this video, and I'm not actually trying to single out any one cultural or ethnic group and claim they're the ones who came to the party late and they're ruining it for everyone else. Let it be unequivocally known that I don't have any issue with any particular group. This is just what groups do when they move into a new area en masse. They stand back to back as a community and resist full assimilation, and that is the definition of balkanization. So now that we've established how mass immigration is the antithesis of assimilation, that then begs the question, well, what's the big deal if someone wants to be Mexican in America or Indian in America? That's what makes America so great, right? It's the diversity of cultures. The attitude that I see a lot is that America is whatever you want it to be. It's like a blank canvas, and all the cultures that come is like paint being flicked onto it. It's evolving, it's dynamic, it's whatever we decide it to be. But that's bogus. Right, maybe it takes an outsider to say this, but America is actually something distinct. It does have a loose, unifying culture from coast to coast. It has its own legacy, history, laws, mythology, customs, traditions, so on and so forth. America is distinct in its own right. Americans do have a culture, and it's served them pretty well so far. But if people in this country increasingly aren't getting a good sense of America and all the nuances that made it successful and important, then that is a big problem. If people are continuing to balkanize off into their own regions, instead of fully becoming a part of the American way of life, instead of fully embracing the work ethic, the moral codes, the legal systems, and hundreds of other implicitly held values, if they're not getting a chance to fully embrace these Americanisms, then those traditions will continue to fade as each generation goes by. If people can't see the value and importance of what's been built here, then they won't care to maintain it. And in fact, they'll probably work to change it. They'll change it to accommodate their interests, and the liberals who are in charge of America's institutions will open the doors for them, either out of white guilt or because they are one of them. Now that's like offensive, but if I was the governor of Utah, I would do the same thing. We see this in all the major cities in the UK. There are Chinese areas, Caribbean areas, Indian areas, Pakistani areas, and sometimes they just have like out-and-out ethnic conflicts with each other. There's no cohesion in the same way you'd see in a single ethnic society. The trust and cooperation is just not the same. And if we were to poll these boroughs on if they loved the UK and would die for it, and loved the flag, and loved the Queen, and all of the British historical institutions, I would suspect they would poll very low.
But these young men also find it hard to identify with Britain too. because we've allowed the weakening of our collective identity. Under the doctrine of state multiculturalism, we've encouraged different cultures to live separate lives apart from each other and apart from the mainstream. We failed to provide a vision of society to which they feel they want to belong. We've even tolerated these segregated communities behaving in ways that run completely counter to our values.
If a quarter of the population hates everything about my country, I can be pretty confident that everything I like about it is going to be gone really soon. So extrapolate that principle for America. People up in their ivory towers, or to contemporize it, Martha's Vineyards, can say that it's beautiful, but it's really not. It's conflict, distrust, and disunity. Unfortunately, I have to lay out this obvious truth. Multiculturalism under a single government has never been better than monoculturalism. Look up the safest places on Earth, and then look up the most dangerous and divisive places on Earth, and compare the diversity rates. Among many reasons, it's often because tribal identities are competing with each other. One point I want to cover that's brought up a lot in immigration debates is that, of course, in the past, large ethnic groups have come to America and have integrated quite well, namely the Irish, the Italians, the Germans. Without going into too much historical detail, the difference is that the Italians, Irish, and Germans were made to integrate. Not only did some of these communities police themselves into adapting to the prevailing culture, the state provided no safety net, no accommodation for people not willing to adapt and contribute. Today, there's next to no pressure to leave behind your previous identity. Almost a quarter of Americans don't even speak English at home, which is actually not surprising because Democrat candidates will literally pander to you in Spanish. You can watch all your adverts in Spanish. You can celebrate all your Spanish holidays. You can be Mexican in every way except geographically, because there's a new truism on the block, which is diversity of culture and race is a good thing. So jokes and bombast aside, I do now want to address something quite serious. The Great Replacement theory unfortunately looms large over the modern immigration debate, really to the advantage of open borders zealots and closed borders absolutists. The term really became mainstream because that was the name of the Christchurch shooter's manifesto, and in America it was cited by the Buffalo shooter, and so in the wake of these tragedies, most immigration hawks were labelled peddlers of this theory. I'm not going to linger on what the shooters did because I don't want to give them any attention, and more specifically, I don't want to let anyone with that mentality have any control over the conversation. So the theory itself goes like this. In the West, white birth rates are decreasing, whilst immigrant birth rates are increasing. And so by these numbers, the demographics will increasingly shift until, according to some, white people will be completely replaced.
Some more news. The results of the 2020 census just came out, and for the first time in American history, the number of white people went down.
There's a lot I think is wrong with this theory, but there is a spirit of reality there. White people won't go extinct on this continent, but all the components that make America America certainly can. As we discussed before, when large parts of the population have a completely alternative vision for America, one that does not value the Constitution, one that does not value certain amendments, namely this one, then they can have real power to move the country in that direction. Numbers mean political power, and so a large number of the population who wants the opposite of what you value will at least create fracturing, and at most will change America. I'm going to go into this a little bit more in my next video, but it's very important to remember that civilizations and what they represent can go extinct even if their ethnicity doesn't. And all of this for a migrant surplus of about $50 billion a year. $50 billion is nice and I would take it for free, but for all the societal implications, it's a bad trade-off. To be honest, I don't even mind diversity. The problem is when people are forced to meld together. For example, historians agree that Africa and the Middle East are so unstable because of the distrust and disunity among ethnic and sectarian tribes, all of them fighting for their own self-interests. Wildly different cultural groups were forced under one government arbitrarily, which is very different to mutual voluntary integration. And now, we have widely different groups competing under one democratic government. And you tell me, is that working out? As time goes on, are we heading towards or away from reconciliation? As a Republican, ask yourself, is adding millions of people with wildly different visions for America going to bring the country together? Probably not. I know people are going to say, well, what about Enrique, my based Honduran friend? And there is a way to get genuine American-loving Enriques without mass immigration and its discontents. By now you should have realized that we're really talking about the wider issue of America weakening, which is not solved simply by cutting immigration. The decrease in white people and traditional values is not really the fault of immigrants. You can attribute that to maybe the death of religion, the advent of contraception, feminism perhaps, But your frustrations about the decline of society should not be taken out on immigrants living in this country. On a personal level, if you feel dissatisfied with society, the best thing you can do is raise a family that reflects the values that you want to see. Without this, any reform will do nothing to stop the death of America. So in conclusion, it's all about balance. I like big companies, I like a fat GDP as much as the next guy, but I also like seeing communities unified. I like seeing the bond between each other. I like being able to speak the same language as my neighbor. I like high trust societies. I don't like balkanization. But at the end of the day, I'm not American. It's up to you. You can have open borders. You can offer all job positions to the whole world. And I'm sure your economy will shoot up. But like the Roman Empire, you will lose what it means to be American. You will lose grip on all commonality. You will go from a people who believed in and stood for something into nothing more than the world's factory. Millions of ants fractured in language and culture, but unified in serving Amazon, Walmart, and pedophiles. That's how it be.